Good afternoon. Welcome to the Business Broadcast. It's our last business broadcast of 2024, and I'm here with the lovely Stuart Mullins. Hi, Stuart.
Hi, Nicky. Hope you're well.
Absolutely. Very, very well. So thank you for joining us today. Today, we are going to talk about company secretarial changes. So just to be clear, these are your requirements that you have to adhere to with Companies House for company secretarial duties for your businesses, for your limited companies, your LLPs, etc., etc. So there are some very substantive changes coming through with very serious consequences if you don't adhere to them. So please perk your ears up, listen to what Stuart's going to say, because there's some really important stuff that you're going to be learning today. So, and as always, just quick housekeeping. You can ask us questions as we go through. Please also, even if it's just to say hi, it's good to know that it's working, the working live. We should be being streamed into LinkedIn Live and YouTube at the same time at the moment. So please do post your questions and comments and say hi. But without further ado, let's go over to Stuart from Clarkslegal to talk about what is actually happening. What are we talking about?
Well, thanks, Nicky. Thank you for the introduction and welcome everybody, and thank you for taking the time on probably the last Friday before Christmas to listen to what I'm going to give an overview and a broad review of something called the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act 2023. I think it's fair to say that this is quite an all-encompassing piece of legislation. I'll come and talk about some of the practical implications for small businesses and large companies alike, but this really is quite revolutionary overhaul of compliance and Companies House, and how Companies House is going to interface with you as directors and shareholders, or designated members and members if you're a corporate partnership. But I think it's worth just starting by outlining, the core obligations that sit with any officer of a company. We know that directors have a codified set of statutory duties, and within that is an obligation to comply with the law and promote the best interests of the company. And underlying those duties is an obligation to keep records. And within the Companies Act, dotted around in various sections, because it is a very big piece of legislation in its own right, there are a number of obligations on directors to keep, for example, records of decision making going back 10 years. There's an obligation that you have to keep registers of members, you have to keep registers of directors addresses. You may have come across the term board minutes. Now it's quite alien for businesses to sit around in a board room as such and make decisions about the business, whether that's to enter into a contract or procure a certain asset or make a key hire. These days it's done a lot quicker, but nevertheless those decisions are made through a conventional meeting that's referred to as a board meeting in the legislation, and records ought to be kept for the benefit of the company, and also the same applies to decisions of shareholders. And again, that distinction between director and shareholder can be blurred for a lot of owner managed businesses where ultimately it's the same person wearing two separate hats, but the distinction is important. In addition to that, there are obligations to file things at Companies House. Now, we're all familiar with talking to Nicky when we get to the end of our financial year to procure our accounts, and we all know that Nicky has 7 months from the end of the financial year to prepare those accounts with us and get them filed at Companies House. And if we don't, then Companies House have the ability to fine the company for failing to file those within time. And similarly, we know there's an obligation if you appoint a new director to send a form to Companies House giving notice of that appointment, or indeed the resignation or retirement of a director. And we are hopefully all aware that when we get to the anniversary of trading, we will have to pop, or the anniversary incorporation, we have to pop into Companies House something called a confirmation statement, which should give notice of any material changes within the previous 12 months. In addition, hopefully you'll be aware that if you are going to play around with your shares or file new or create new articles of association, that you are under an obligation to file those articles of association with the registrar of companies. And hopefully you're aware that when you unlock new shares, you have to file SH01 return giving details of those new shares. And if you are going to cancel or convert shares to treasury, there are other forms similar in structure that should be lodged and recorded. Now, Nicky and I have both been doing our respective roles for a number of years, and we have identified and come across frequently instances where those filings perhaps aren't quite accurate, and or information is missing from the company record. Now, that's not necessarily due to any intentional malice or misfeasance by a director. That's because you're all busy running around, running your businesses, dealing with all the daily issues that arise. Generally speaking, there's no material impact to the performance of your business historically when those filings are wrong. And you normally only come to find out about them when you're looking to sell those shares, or perhaps bring in an investor to the company when those books and records are looked at a little bit more closely. Well, one of the core elements of this piece of legislation that came in towards the end of 2023, called the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, will change the views and the abilities of Companies House, and should increase and focus company filings and records with a little bit more of a priority. Now, the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act really is a large piece of legislation which sits behind the government's obligation and understandably commitment to clamp down on financial fraud, to clamp down on illegal monies, and circulation of illicit proceeds with sanctioned countries. And with that in mind, it has identified that the Registrar and Companies House, under the current framework or pre-2023 framework, was seen as a little bit of a postbox. It had powers. It would delve out fines for failing to file accounts, but ultimately it didn't really look too closely or beyond the information that people put against the company number on the company record. And the government have naturally seen that this can be used or could be significantly improved to prevent misfeasance and prevent financial crime, which I'm sure we all agree is a very good thing.
Absolutely.
So with that in mind, this is a quite complicated piece of legislation. As I said, it received royal assent in 2023, which is when it came into law. Some bits of it are in force and came into force earlier this year, and some elements are probably going to be phased in between the end of 25 and Easter 2026. And after I explain why or the nature of some of these changes, I think it will make sense as to the amount of work that's going to need to be done behind the scenes to give effect to this overhaul. I think it's fair to say that the first starting point of this legislation is that the registrar and Companies House are going to be given increased powers to promote and maintain the integrity of the register through new statutory abilities. For example, since May 2024, Companies House can now impose financial penalties for breaches of the Companies Act by companies up to £10,000 without having to go to court or prosecute. So what we can see with the start of this legislation is some teeth coming out for the registrar, really, to take action for those companies that fall foul of their legal requirements.
So give an example of what they could be, those penalties. I mean, I think I've been seeing some of these threatening letters that they say, well, if you don't do such and such, you could potentially have such and such penalty, etc. What sorts of things is this that, as simple as when you don't file your confirmation statement in time? What sorts of things are they applying the penalties to?
Well, as I say, it's an increased limit for fining. So the areas in which they can fine generally have increased. So, persistent failing of accounts, for example, failing to update PSC registers, for example, or PSCs being persons of significant control, i.e. the obligation to make clear to the registrar who really sits behind the company in terms of ownership or influence and control. You might not necessarily be a de facto director or a named shareholder.
Okay, and those fines are generally to the legal entity, aren't they? Or do some of them go to potentially the individuals?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Correct.
Great. Okay. So no, carry on. Sorry, I was going too squishy.
So as I say, that's an example. There's also some additional criminal offences that have been brought in around accounts in particular. Yes. As Nicky will no doubt know. One of the other areas that's really enforced now that's come in is this requirement on incorporating a company to have and provide information of an email address that is an appropriate email address. That's what the legislation says, and that really is an email address that comes to the attention of persons acting on behalf of the company. So if you are setting up a company now, you will have to provide the registrar with that information. If you are an existing company, what's going to happen is over time, when you have to submit your next confirmation statement, there will be an obligation to provide that information at the stage. Now, practical tip: people move on, people retire. This is going to be effectively an address for service for Companies House to ask information of you, and as we move on, I'll identify what sorts of information they may require of you. But it is your conduit into Companies House, so it's best when you set that email address up to set it up so that a class of people, so perhaps all the directors, get that information, so it doesn't fall through the cracks. There's also changes to company names. Currently, there are restrictions on the types of prohibited or sensitive names. The government is looking to tighten names that may mislead the public, or names that may suggest an illicit activity, or names that may suggest an association with a foreign power. So you may well, if, as I say, that's on incorporated companies, but going forward, that will be an ability for the Companies House to write to you and ask you to change your company name. And if you don't, they will remove it, and you'll see a company with just a number at Companies House in blank. And if you continue to persist, they do have the ability to invoke a strike-off process.
So I'm a bit confused about that one. So I understand if it's illicit activity. So with the foreign power one, can you sort of give me an example of what sort of thing that they would be looking at?
Yeah, if there's we
That's
see,
what
don't
I
we?
love Putin or something.
Well,
I love
that sort of thing, yes, but also trying to suggest that you're somehow a representative of a foreign government or a foreign entity without the de facto authority for having that link. Again, it's just trying to tighten the name to prevent and protect the public.
Okay, so making sure that you're not purporting to be from somewhere that you're not.
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense. Absolutely. Okay.
One of the largest or key changes is going to be around the obligation to provide ID as a director or shareholder or a person of significant control to to Companies House. Now, currently, when you when you provide information to Companies House, you set out your name, you set out your address, you sign the form electronically or in paper format. It gets filed. The confirmation statement gives an update of registered members. There is no obligation or process whereby Companies House seek to establish the identity of company officers or indeed shareholders. And that is going to change. There will be an obligation to provide that level of ID, and that ID can be satisfied or will be satisfied in one of two ways. One, individuals will need to provide information about their personal information, driving license, etc., I suspect, through a portal that doesn't exist yet. Or the other obligation will be on professionals like Nicky and my firm, who are what we call authorized corporate service providers, who have professional obligations to our respective regulators that ensures that we are able to verify the identification of people through process. And if we do that, then we will provide that information, verify the ID, and we will be able to establish that information for you. One of the issues is going to be around RLEs. So a person of significant control is somebody who has more than 25% shares in a company. And quite often when you have a company that's part of a group, the parent company will be the relevant legal entity. And currently you would establish, you would set out that the RLE is the who the RLE is on your confirmation statement and notify Companies House in the using the appropriate form. We will need to see that ultimately with this ID movement going forward, there will be an obligation for a representative of the RLE to be identified through the Companies House identification requirements, so that they understand ultimately who the person or persons are that sit very much behind the company.
Now, sorry, just a quick question on that, Stuart. So, so I can understand for the directors, but for the identification purposes, often those will be, because often you'll have a parent company in, I don't know, South Africa, America, Germany, whatever else. They presumably, therefore, they are going to be using an international identification check system somehow.
Yeah, I don't know the detail of the check that they're going to require of
This sounds like it's been set up yet, so we'll see.
But ultimately, if they were to, those sorts of clients would typically use a law firm or an accountant or some other form of authorized corporate services provider. Now, ultimately, it may well be incumbent upon us to carry out the checks to let the registrar know that ID has been verified and we can provide that information.
Yes. Yes, and of course, we would be doing, because we would use Smart Search or whatever other AML online system that the professional would use to make sure that we can do those kind of checks and verify people.
And to be honest, I mean, that we all have those clients when you're looking at beneficial ownership that does sit abroad, and if the abroad entity isn't listed on a recognised exchange and is a private company, we ultimately have to go beyond that. And if it's held in a trust, we need to seek the identity and satisfy ourselves as to the identity of those individuals, and also satisfy ourselves that they don't sit on any sanctions or other lists that we're and that's part of our professional duties, really.
Absolutely. I mean, it's for us that do this all the time, it's not really any major change. It's all the same sort of checks, but obviously for the businesses that do all of this stuff themselves, it's a major step change.
Well, it is, and it may well be that businesses start seeing company secretarial fees increasing, because for those that do use practices like mine and yours, there is there is additional liability, but also additional time and cost incurred to carry out these identity checks.
If nothing else, companies' house fees have already increased, which is because they've put everything up so that they can afford to pay for the people to do all these extra things.
Well, that's right, and that was also a part of the one of the early parts of those increases came in under the Economic Corporate Crime and Transparency legislation. The argument for the government is that that those increased fees are necessary so that they are fiscally positioned to undertake the reviews and challenges that they need to take to ensure that corporate structures aren't being, misused or abused for illicit or illegal purposes.
Indeed.
So the other point to make about this idea is that if you do not provide the registrar within a timely fashion of the identity of a director, that person is not allowed to act as a director for the company. So there are instances when you're going to have to think about appointing new directors as a result of a reorganization, or you take on a new hire and they're going to sit on the board, that you've gathered this information and complied with those obligations, so that the moment they sign their service contract with you, they are able to file the necessary documentation with the registrar. Because if they don't within a period of 14 days, they're no longer a director, but they are holding themselves out as a director, and there could be an issue of personal liability. So this is an important piece of legislation, just to make sure that you've got your own checks and balances and your own processes in place when you're hiring new people to your board and management teams.
I mean, that's quite straightforward with directorships. You resign for being a director and you cease becoming a director. If you become a director, then you get appointed, etc. That's straightforward. But so for limited companies, you've got the distinction between shareholders and directors. So you can be sorting out the shareholding and everything separately in the background. This might be a bit too much specifically here, but for partnerships, where the partner is like the director and the shareholder at the same time, and they're resigned from the partnership, but the intricacies of removing their capital account, all of that hasn't happened. What's the issue there? Because I mean, I know I've got particular instances where a partner is resigned, but they're not being removed yet for whatever other reason. I might be getting a bit too specific, but what sort of, who's got the responsibility there of making sure partnerships are all correct?
Well, I think in terms of removal of an officer, there is an obligation already, isn't there? Once they've resigned as a member, for the company's in this. Remember, we're in the context of limited liability partnerships here, rather than unincorporated, because there is no corporate veil there. But with a limited liability partnership, there is an obligation to notify the registrar of changes to members and designated members. I think it's within 28 days.
28 days.
Now, if I was retiring from a limited liability partnership, I would want my deed of indemnity, which typically sits behind that retirement, to be given contemporaneous with a removal from Companies House. I wouldn't want to be held out on a public record that I was a member or designated member of a partnership, when in fact I wasn't.
You've left.
And I think that's right for directors. But
Yeah.
but one of the it's interesting really, because it sort of leads on to this concept of corporate directors. Now, we all have come across companies where currently you can have a company as a director of another company.
Yes.
Now, I'm not sure how long that's going to survive. I'm not sure. There is discussion around whether or not corporate directors should in fact be able to continue, and also
It's a shame. I mean, I understand the purpose of why you would have a corporate director. So if you've got an interest in a business and you're ensuring that you want to have a director attendance, so you put the corporate as the director and then you can assign a relevant person. But I suppose what you're just having to do is more frequently officially put who is the person going to be sitting on the board on behalf of the corporate entity, I presume.
That's right. The future of them, I think, is uncertain. But
Yeah.
I think what is going to happen is you are going to have to identify the person or persons who sit behind that corporate director to comply as if they were in-person directors of the company of which, this is going to be confusing, of the company which is the corporate director, if you follow me. And I think if you didn't do that, you'd just ride a coach and horses straight through the ID requirement, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What about because sometimes often you have corporates as being the company secretary as well. Do you see that changing, or do you think that will stay in because so many people just do, right, let's just delegate Clarkslegal, for example, to be the company secretary?
Yeah, I do think that people will see the role of the secretary, and if you don't have a secretary, of course, there's no requirement to have one.
No longer.
The obligation just falls with the board. But I do think that that secretarial role, is going to be seen as an increasingly important one.
I think it's a very useful one, especially for small businesses. So if you don't have another director, you're a single director, it's very useful to have a company secretary appointed. So if you're ever incapacitated, there is somebody that doesn't have the same responsibilities as director, but can actually physically do something in liaison with Companies House on your behalf whilst you're incapacitated. So it's very useful role.
I think that's a fair point, and it's not that expensive. It's not that expensive.
No, absolutely.
I'm just conscious of time, so just to
conscious of time. So, shall we just thumbs up of the? Obviously, if anyone's got any questions, please pop them down. But let's just do a quick summary of, with all the changes, what are the recommendations of what you'd say top three things that people that are directors or owners of a company, what they should, or an LLP, what they should be thinking about for next year.
Yeah. So I think now is the time to look at your corporate record, critically review your company books, your paper records, what you think is the position in terms of ownership and control, and get that looked at Companies House and make sure that that's in line. One of the changes is going to be that the Companies House will be able to raise requisitions on the company record, and they will basically be able to annotate your company record. Now, I suspect that if you are a company with a nice clean record, you will probably be more attractive to things like investors and banks than one that's got loads of amends and crosses and requisitions noted against it. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think you should, as an exercise, ensure that you do have ID verification for your shareholders, and that you do have ID for your directors. And of course, in the same way that anyone who works for you under the right to work regulations, you would have to establish their identity as well. So I think just having that practice in place. And then I think it really is just about just reviewing things like share structure, historic addresses, having a sort of audit, if you like, of your company record to make sure everything's up to date, so that when this comes in place, you're going to be able to some of this more significant legislation comes in during 2025. You're well placed to comply with it as quick as you can.
Absolutely, makes sense. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stuart. So make sure, I was definitely just echoing, make sure what you've got at the moment is up to date. You've got a legal duty to do this as a director, so you have to take this very seriously. You need to make sure that so if you don't have anybody internally that can sort this out for you, then do make sure you speak to your accountants or your lawyers to help you with this, because it causes such a problem. It's really silly little things that are forgotten along the way, because it's some accountant 30 years ago or a lawyer set something up some way and it wasn't then recorded properly in Company House. Causes such problems when it comes to either getting investors or selling your business, or if you have some sort of legal dispute with your other partners or directors, whatever. It's very, very important to have this all correct. And I think most of us really welcome this change, the seriousness of making sure that things are right. It may feel like a burden, but most people that are running a business are doing things properly anyway. So hopefully it shouldn't feel too much more of a burden, and hopefully stop all those scallywags from misusing Companies House. Thank you so much, Stuart. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your help this year.
It's my pleasure. Have a lovely Christmas.
Yeah, and thank you so much to everybody that has watched live today. There is quite a few of you are watching, but you might be already on the mulled wine, so perhaps not why you weren't up for questions today. But feel free to contact myself or Stuart with any questions that you do have. And I'm sure Stuart will join us for various other business podcasts in the new year. In our next broadcast, because we are every 2 weeks. So we have the managing director from Chelsea Corporate joining us in 2 weeks. Alan, on the 3rd of January, it's the one in 2 weeks. And we're going to be talking about, so it's very interesting for, any business again, because I'm trying to make sure that everything is very generic and really relevant to lots of business owners. If you're ever going to be considered for being bought, your business, Chelsea Corporate represent many corporate buyers, and so he's going to explain to us what the buyers particularly are looking for when they're looking for your business. So I'm sure on the list will be making sure your company secretarial stuff is up to date. I'll make sure to check that with him, but it'll be lots of other useful things. So please do book and join us on the 3rd. On the 17th, we're going to be talking about employment law updates. We'll be talking to Nick Barrington from Corona, which is part of Peninsula Group. So to talk about what all the increase in employment legislation is that you as employers need to be aware of. But thank you so much. Thank you again. Have a wonderful Christmas and New Year, everybody. I know you, all you business owners, are probably still doing a certain amount of work, but do try to have a bit of a break and enjoy yourself, because we recognise your workers, even though some government members might not. But thank you so much. Have a lovely Christmas. Thank you again, Stuart, and
Pleasure.
Happy New Year.
Thank you, Nikki.